Welcome to the Single Dads of the Midwest, episode 38. I'm joined by the amazing Carrie and Francisco to talk about music education. They're both amazing music teachers. So we'll learn all about those notes and scales, but I'll let them introduce themselves.
Well, I'm Carrie Borja, and I teach middle school band out here in Colorado. This is my fourth year of teaching, and I've been at the same school this whole time. So I teach sixth, seventh, and eighth grade band, as well as jazz band. And in total, I've got about 220 students in my program. So a lot of, adolescent energy. It keeps me on my toes. No 2 days are alike, that's for sure.
And I'm Francisco Borja. I teach high school up here in Colorado in the same district. And there's a cat playing in the background. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. I have taught also middle school orchestra before my current position, and did my master's degree in conducting at the University of Colorado. And yeah, it's a fun time. a lot of possibilities when you're teaching music.
No, I'd imagine. And I'm curious. I first of all, shout out to Sheldon for putting us together. I always joke that he keeps this podcast alive. He sent over a list of questions. I feel like we answered the first few just in the introductions of like the instruments you all teach and the grades. But I'm curious if like the pandemic led to some insights because that must have been, a new setting. I don't know what the rules were in Colorado, but I imagine there was at least a period of time where it was virtual. So I'm
Yeah,
curious
it
if,
was it was
yeah, what the
crazy.
differences were.
And the very start of the pandemic was the last half of my very first year of teaching, which, as a first year teacher, you barely know what you're doing anyway. And then, this whole crazy event happened. And really, for that fourth quarter, um, I didn't really actually get to teach. It was, we could post some optional assignments online, and I would host like a weekly like get together in my Zoom classroom where we would play some games or something, but that was kind of it. My second year was really the most impacted. It was most impacted because that's when kids were going back to school, but still no one really knew it was happening. So I think we started our school year virtually. So, I was trying to get all these kids started on an instrument for the very first time over a computer screen. And that was crazy because, normally I'm walking around, like a kid's holding their instrument upside down, and you just kind of grab them and move it. And, I can hear all the things that were happening. And, because of lag time with the way that being on Zoom works, like I couldn't just have them all unmute and play. That didn't work. So that was insane. And then when they did get to come back to school, we had these rules of they had to be 6 feet apart, of course. And we had these bell covers that we had to put on the instruments. And then they also had these, they were called a band mask. It was just a regular mask with a hole cut in it, which not really sure how great of an idea that was or was not. And I had to teach them outside. So for a long time, we were outside doing all of that. And it was nuts because there were also like these terrible wildfires happening in Colorado. And so I remember being outside with these kids and like ashes raining down from the sky because of the fires. I'm like, is this real? Like, is this the apocalypse or something?
It sounds
So
super
luckily
difficult.
we're not in those times anymore, but it was, I don't know. I've like blocked it from my memory. It's like a dark place that I try to forget it even happened.
Challenging to say the least, but
Yeah.
impressive that you had to deal with all of that. Like a mix of like terrible lag on the internet, random masks, instrument things, and ash coming from the sky.
Uh-huh. Just your normal second year of teaching.
Typical.
Yeah, I got very lucky, I think, because I left my school. Well, my third year of teaching was when I applied and was accepted for my master's degree. And so that was the same year that COVID started. And I remember we had like our big state evaluation in like the first week of March. And then the next week was spring break. And right around that time is when all the news stories were popping up. And, like we were basically, quote, done for the year in terms of like the important stuff that we had to do. All we had left was one more concert. And I remember thinking in the middle of that spring break, being like, I might not really ever return to this school after this week. And sure enough, during spring break, they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to have, it's just going to be another extra week extension to spring break. And then that was it. After that, it was all, one assignment a week for electives, and you couldn't really do very much. And so it just it was a little disappointing. But, the kids were really good sports about it. And it was interesting because, for as hard as it was to do that shift to all online, like playing for a lot of these kids, playing music was like the thing that they wanted to do for school. It was like the one thing that was sort of different enough where it wasn't, oh, well, you have to complete this worksheet and then you have to do this to like meet some state standard. It was just like, now you have to do this to like, just fulfill the requirements of this class, but it was in a way that was fulfilling for them too. It wasn't just another box to check in terms of a grade. And so I think that kind of impacted me because it really showed me like how many of them, they took this class for granted, and all of a sudden they realized like, oh, well, actually this is kind of nice to be completely different from every other thing we do. And then, during my master's degree, it was kind of the same thing. The first year was like in that like kind of like COVID and a half time where it was like, oh, okay, well now, we know how infectious this thing is. We know kind of the protocols. And so it was like masks and double mask. And we had to do this thing where you could only play for 30 minutes at a time. And then you had to ventilate the room for 15 minutes. And then you could go back in for another half hour. And then you had to go back out again. And so for, ensembles, typically we've been used to like, 2-hour rehearsal, hour and a half rehearsal, like straight through, you just kind of keep going. And then all of a sudden that's taken from you. And so it kind of refocuses how you prioritize like teaching some of those things that you're just, you're used to having time, and all of a sudden now you're really constrained. I think that was another kind of big impact from COVID, was that. And then, gradually as things eased up, we got back into the swing of things. Like we got marching band at the university back. So I got an opportunity to do some of that, and a little bit more involvement in terms of like actual activities at the university, instead of just, hey, show up for like, 30 minutes, take a break for 15, another 30, and then go home, because all the classes were still online.
Yeah, no, you make a good point about the efficiency of your teaching. Because same thing. And I was in a different space of our school every class period. And my classes were so big that made it an extra challenge. And by the time, we transitioned rooms and get kids where they needed to be, I had maybe like 20 minutes to get through my instruction. So it really made me learn like, this is what is a priority. And I think my current 8th graders were the ones who learned that way as 6th graders. And I think they turned out okay. So somehow it all worked out in the end.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenging time, and I feel like music probably had a special, challenges just given the nature of like the course of study. And speaking about, prioritizing, maybe that's in here, but there's a question from Sheldon on what are the 3 rules of music education. I'm not sure if that was like discussed as in like these are the 3 set rules, or that was like previously discussed, or he's just open. It's an open-ended question, so feel free to take it as whatever way you see fit.
I mean, there's 3 rules that are kind of a meme in the music community, which I don't think we can't really repeat them. But we'll tell you. Maybe we can tell you
Yeah,
afterwards.
we'll tell you afterwards. I don't want
Sure.
to
Now
be
I'm curious, or you could translate it in a digestible
Yes,
way, I
yes.
guess.
But I don't know. I feel like you could make up any sort of three rules you wanted to about music education. I think in general, what you are aiming for is what ideally would be like the goal of any education, which is, connect with your students, make them feel heard, and then, give them something that uplifts them, like elevate their understanding of whatever you're teaching. I think those are kind of the three things that I always try and stick to, for better or worse.
Mine are kind of cliches, I think. But when I was student teaching, my mentor teacher said something that really stuck to me, and I try to communicate this to my kids, which is um, I'm not there to teach the kids music necessarily. I am there to teach them how to be a good citizen, a good human through the medium of music, because you do, like, you learn how to work with other people, you learn how to listen to others, and you know when your voice is important and when you need to make space for someone else's voice. So that one has always been a big one to me. um, and we also, I think both of us in our teaching philosophies, you prioritize relationships with students, because you know, trying to get a teenager to do anything can be a really big task. And when the students know that what you're asking them to do just comes from a place of you actually care about them and care about their success, I feel like that goes a long way. And for me, the third one is don't take things too seriously. And I struggle with this one sometimes because, like, we took our hobbies, right, and turned them into our career. And for most people, it's like, that is the dream. You are doing the thing that you love for work. Like, what could be better? But sometimes you can get really frustrated because, like, it's our passion. And then, like, sometimes the kids don't care about what they're playing and what they're doing. And, like, you can take that kind of personally. Or, kids having a bad day and they say something rude to you, you take that personally. So sometimes it's just a reminder to not take everything or yourself too seriously, to be honest. So
No, that makes sense. I feel like your both of your students are in good hands. Just like the outlook that you have, like wanting to make the students better. That's good. And especially what you said, Carrie, about like teaching through the medium of like music. I feel like those lessons like literally have to be there because you have to
yeah,
listen literally
exactly.
to everyone else. You have to be in sync. Um,
And it's part of that is so tough because like it's like the personal priority part is, I think, the most difficult thing to teach, because like everything else in their day and in their lives is so structured around like individuality and like putting your like footprint on something. And not that there's not space for that, there certainly is, but it's more about like the context in which they're experiencing it. Like they go home every day and they don't have to, but they have to like spend 2 hours on TikTok to like find the latest dance or the latest meme or whatever, and then they have to like make their own version of it in their head, so they know like, oh, if this social situation pops up, then I can like do this thing. And it's hard when they come to music class and you're trying to get them to like achieve a group goal, whereas like in a math class or an English class, you're kind of trying to get them like individually to a certain level. um it's hard to get them to like care sometimes, as harsh as that sounds, to really care about like, oh well, the information that this person is giving me is not just for like me, but it's for everyone else too. And I think they have a tough time with that, especially in the age of technology, with like reconciling that with their like personal priorities, of like, which is fair. I think totally fair. Like, if you didn't eat today, I think that should probably be like at the top of your
Yeah.
priorities. And if you're thinking about what am I going to eat later, instead of like, hey, play this note in tune, like I'm not necessarily bothered by that, but it's still kind of like in the context of the classroom, it's like, well, why aren't you doing this thing that I'm telling you to do?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you hit a good point of like music versus other subjects being more individually oriented, whereas music you literally need to like the goal is to create like a unison with everyone together. I think one of
Mhm.
my favorite movies about music, it's probably my favorite movie about music is Drumline with Nick Cannon from the
Yeah.
early 2000s. But there's just all these like iconic quotes, like one band,
Mhm.
one sound, and
Mhm.
you have to learn to follow before you lead. There's just all this iconic, like very like self help, self development stuff, and I really love like a lot of the themes of the movie. And yeah, it feels like it. I mean, there's probably a bigger political science context that we're missing here, but I definitely feel like community goals are definitely feeling like they're harder in some ways, and I'm not sure if
Yeah.
it was always the case, but I feel like yeah, technology is definitely playing a part, but sometimes it can be helpful too. I know when I learn a lot of stuff from base, it's from watching videos online. So there's like pros and cons
Yeah.
Definitely.
from the internet. Um, the next question we get from Sheldon, I wasn't sure if either of you two had experience, but how does it feel to be a conductor in front of a big group of students? And do you feel powerful and powerless? And I have a follow up question to this, but we'll start with this.
I think the answer is both.
Yeah. That's what
Honestly,
I thought
like,
too.
I mean, even I'm thinking about like today, there's this sort of like, there's a point I think in every music class where you get one of two things. You get both things actually. And the first is like you get total and complete like attention and buy-in. And every it's every like 2 minutes you get just like this moment of like, okay, we'll do this thing, and then they're like gone, they're somewhere else, and then 2 minutes later you catch their attention again, and it's like, okay, we achieved this thing, and then they're gone again.
It's their TikTok brain.
Yeah, it's TikTok brain. It's definitely like, okay, now I scroll to the next video. What's this thing? Okay, I'm not interested in that. Play in tune, I don't know what that is. Play loud, okay, I got that. And then the second thing, which is, the ability of a mass group of people to just completely disregard any sort of authority, and it's not, I don't think they even do it like consciously in a malicious way, but like I even think that like today in class, I was like teaching something, and like I stopped, and I said something, and then they did it, and then I stopped the next time, and then I have these kids in the percussion section who love to play Megalovania on anything they can find, and like
I
kids
mean, I
always
love
have,
to play that song too.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And every kid has like their song that they're like, oh, I learned this song and now I'm going to play it 4,000 times for you, even though you've already heard it. I'm like, okay, I was impressed the first time. Now on time 3,562, I'm good, And so they just like start going off and going crazy, and I'm just waiting. Like you have to wait, and you have to like get them back to the expectation of like, oh yeah, we're supposed to pay attention now. So I mean, it's definitely both, and I think both are. I don't think being powerless is necessarily a bad thing, because even though they're not paying attention to you in that moment, it is sort of like a pseudo communal moment for them. Like they are all doing the ideal version of what we want them to do, which is playing music for fun. They're just doing it at the wrong time.
Yeah, I feel like I feel powerless most of the time. Not in like a really sad way, but I'm working with 11, 12, 13 year olds, and it's more so that I'm trying to get them to be more aware, and so that powerless feeling comes from, okay, you're really close, but I need you looking up here. So like today, we were working on the end of a piece where they have a retardando, which is where you slow down. And so they just had to watch for like my last 4 beats. And every time there were a couple kids who just didn't wait for that last beat. So frustrating. And then like kids start getting mad at the other kids. But then once you achieve it together, then you get to that more. And it's not even really a powerful feeling. It's just like, yes, now we are actually in it together as a group. I will say though, this is like tapping into my ego a little bit. When I was in college, I was a drum major for our marching band, and like, you know, the when our football team wasn't like completely as bad as they are right now, we would actually like win some games, and just like the energy of like getting to conduct the marching band when like something crazy just happened on the field and like you're feeding off the energy of the stadium. That's obviously a little bit different of a situation, but in those moments I really felt it.
And I think, they feel the same way. I think they feel moments of power, like when they can achieve something. Like the other day, as teaching this thing, and this kid just like nailed this answer, and like I could tell that he was like gonna say the right thing, because his face just like blew up. Like he was so excited to like say something. And this is a kid that I'm like, he's the Megalovania kid. He's like constantly I'm like, dude, don't do that. We're doing something else right now. So it was like a really cool moment for him to like have that power and see that, kind of spark in his brain.
Well, it's getting a kid as excited to play
Yeah,
Megalovania as
right.
they are to
Anything
do this
else.
other thing.
Yeah. And I think, in balance, I think they also probably feel powerless because they don't know how to do something. And I think that influences like how they act in classes. Because, if you feel uncomfortable, I think the sort of go-to is to uh, create laughter, or like make a situation where people will be like, oh, well, he's really funny, or she's really funny, or like, something like that, where it's the attention on you is positive, instead of like, oh, they don't know this thing. And I think there's equal balance for both. I think there should be moments where they feel powerless so that they can feel powerful later.
No, that makes a lot of sense. My follow-up question was, and I guess this would maybe apply more to like a slightly more professional, or I say advanced situation, because obviously I'm sure adolescents still have a lot of guidance that they need. But what do you see as like the role of the conductor? Because like I feel like a lot of times when I've been to like more like professional like concerts and stuff, I feel like they've done this a million times, so theoretically they know when the highs and lows and stuff are. But I guess what do you and maybe there's a difference between what happens there and what happens maybe in like a classroom for middle schoolers. But what do you see as like the role of the conductor?
I think this is more your area of expertise, Mr. Master in conducting.
Well, I think about this all the time, because there is an orchestra in New York called the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra that rehearses and performs without a conductor. And they do literature that's really complex and really advanced. And it's a really like sort of democratic, social sort of structure for this orchestra, and it's really unique. I think, you know, sometimes a conductor is there to make things easier, because some music, like Stravinsky in particular, can get really tricky in terms of like the technique and the time signature and what have you. But other times, as you said, like they've rehearsed things thousands of times, and often they don't, you don't really even need to rehearse it more than 3 times. So I think what the conductor's job mainly is to be a conduit and to sort of unify an expectation for the group, and give feedback from a sort of third party stance, if you will. If you're a musician and you are playing in an ensemble, all you have in front of you is your part. So let's say like that's the first party, is your part. And then you also have obviously the other musicians that are around you. And ideally, if you are in a professional environment, more likely than not, you are listening to them. If you are in high school or middle school, maybe you're still learning to do that. But that's kind of like the second party, is like, are you actually listening, and are you like paying attention to what's going on around you? And then I think the conductor is the third party, because they get to hear everything. And more importantly, they should know everything that's going on, because you have, as a conductor, you have the whole score, and you've, studied it for X number of hours, and like all the little intricacies and all the little sort of like, you know, left and right turns that you can take within the music that sort of gets your model of it out there, because they don't know necessarily beyond what's written on their page what to do. You can, as a musician, you can see like your dynamics, like piano, mezzo forte, crescendo, great, but like none of I don't think that dynamics actually mean anything unless you ascribe a definition to them. Because I could tell anyone, okay, play piano, and they could play soft, and that's just like a one-dimensional sort of view to it, But if I'm a conductor and or any musician really, and I've studied the score and I've like made decisions based off of what I've studied, then I can go ahead and say, okay, well, this is piano, but it's maybe a little bit more foreboding. So it's a slightly different color of piano than just soft, less like binary and more quantum, if you will. So I think that's what the conductor's there to do. I used to think it was like about looking really cool while you were waving the stick. But again, that's really just like a conduit to like focus everybody's emotions and energies into moments. It's like it's a feedback loop of like they're giving you something and then you're giving something back, and then that's what creates those moments of like pure passion. That if you like go to an orchestra concert and you see a really good conductor, you'll notice that like they really connect with their musicians and they're not just there to like wave their arm.
Yeah, we didn't really have this professor in college, but a professor at our college had said one time, well, I've never had a conductor who made me play any better. And I have always thought that was really sad, because I don't think it's necessarily about a conductor making a musician play better, but when you are sitting in an ensemble and you have a really excellent conductor, you feel their energy, like you are responding to their interpretation of the music. Even like pieces that I have played before, depending on who was conducting it, it was a totally different experience. So, the conductor really is a conduit and just kind of bringing a group together to portray an interpretation of a piece of music.
Yeah, and I mean, this is such an abstract concept, because like, I don't know, in my head there's always like there's like a conflict between like, well, I should be able to explain this in like a concrete term, right? Of like, if I were to like walk into a company meeting and I had to give like a slideshow presentation, I would be like, oh, well, you see, like, at this moment the brain releases this chemical and this thing happens and this can, and like, but like, I don't think you can really do that. I don't think you can necessarily, nor should you boil it down to like, here's a scientific method for getting the most like emotionally responsive performance out of a group of musicians. I think it's more about, like how you help people to experience what they're doing. And that requires buy-in from both sides. Like if, like Carrie was saying, if you're of the disposition of like, oh, well, no one can tell me anything, which is the struggle that we face with a lot of our students, is that, they're very self-assured and have their identities, which great for them. And they're like, well, no one can tell me how to do this thing, then you're kind of hurting yourself and you're losing that part of it. But if you kind of open yourself up and let somebody else like kind of guide you toward an outcome, then I think that's where those moments happen, and that's where that power comes from.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like it's almost like, and this might not be the best analogy, but like a kind of like a coach in a sports team, where they're not the ones actually doing the actions, but they're ideally bringing out the best in their players.
Exactly.
Right.
Taking it to like a comedic notch, the next question is, what's the funniest thing one of your kids has done besides playing Megalovania 4,000 times?
Well, I'm trying to think of funniest that's also appropriate.
There's a lot of
there's students that doing things that are completely
me personally, I have a really hard time being like super strict. Well, being super strict in the sense of like, I laugh really easily. Like I like to laugh and I like to enjoy things, and I think that kids are really funny, which is part of why I love teaching, is because they just have such unique like all of them have such unique personalities, and they all do different things, and they do a lot of funny things because they're like still learning how to be people, and so I like cannot keep a straight face.
He does not have a poker face. He
Yeah.
laughs at like things. Well, me as a teacher, like I will laugh on the inside, but I'm like,
and I cannot
He
keep
can't
it on.
hold it.
I can't keep it on the inside. I'm just like, you say something funny, I'm gonna laugh because I think it's funny, and and that's, for me personally. Like, I think that they should be able to express themselves in whatever way they deem fit, regardless of whatever social norm is supposed to be imposed upon them. That's not to say like they should go completely over the line with things, but like the language that they use primarily is, if they're really impassioned about something and they like throw a swear word in there, then like I don't care, because they're showing they have a connection to it. On the more like funny side of it, I remember vividly, this is like one of my favorite stories from when I was teaching middle school orchestra. And uh this was like my mixed class, one of my mixed classes of 7th and 8th grade students. And I think this is my second or third year teaching. And this kid like dropped his rosin because he was putting rosin on his bow in the middle of class. He drops it like lands a little bit away from him. He's like trying to use his bow to like bring it back over to himself, to instead of like getting up and going to grab it, because he didn't, I think in his mind he didn't want to disturb anything that was going on, because we were like rehearsing through a piece, which good for him to have like that sort of like intent. But it went on for so long, and I didn't help him. I was like, he'll get it eventually, or like he'll get up and he'll grab it. Like, I'll let him be independent. But it went on for so long that like literally like 3 or 4 minutes of him just like trying to grab this rosin, that I just finally stopped, and I was like, and I thought for a second, and I looked at him, and I was like, this is a teaching moment for this kid. And I looked at him and I said, Brandon, do you know why we are better than crabs? Why we are like at the top of the food chain, apex predator? And he looks up at me, like still having not grabbed this rosin, right? Still bow out, like trying to like knock it closer to himself. He looks up at me with like the most earnest look in human history. And he says, less legs.
Yes, Brandon.
That's pretty good.
That's what I was going to say too, actually.
Oh gosh. My story, the one that came to mind, there's so many, like I said, every day there's just something new. But one of the ones that comes to mind is so my first ever group of 6th graders, me as a first year teacher, I was like really like hard and just strict, and part of that's because I didn't know what else to do because these kids are wild. And so the next year, a lot of times kids give us gifts before winter break, for the holidays. And, sometimes like their moms write the card like, oh, thank you, and all of this. And sometimes, they make the kid write the card. And this one student, I don't think I saved this card, and I'm mad at myself for it. But he goes, Dear Miss Proctor, in 6th grade, I thought you were the meanest teacher. But now I realize we were just really bad.
Oh, wow.
And then he ended it with, thanks for trying to make us sound better.
I mean, that's nice.
It was nice, but I was also like, oh my gosh. I can't believe you just admitted that in a card to me.
Wow. That's I don't even know.
Sometimes that's the best part, is like them not having a filter gets them into trouble, but it's also admittedly really funny.
Yeah.
That's great. And Francisco, what were you trying to say with the crabs thing?
I was trying to tell him we have thumbs, so I can just like reach over and grab the thing that I'm trying to.
feel like legs was the
He's
real
yeah,
answer.
I don't know. He just like, it's kid logic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
A wild card question that isn't on the questions, but have you all seen the movie Whiplash, and how do you feel about
The first time I saw Whiplash was right before, like 2 weeks before I was starting music school, and like in my head, I'm like, oh no, is this what is this what it's going to be like? And like slightly terrified myself. Um, but I think about it all the time, especially when I cut kids off and I say that was not my tempo.
it? Oh my god.
To be fair, I've
Rushing or
never
are you
thrown a
dragging?
cymbal though because they didn't take my tempo.
Whenever I see movies about music, I always think like, man, if I could just go to Hollywood and become a consultant for all these films, I could make so much money. Just like I would help them make as many music movies as they wanted to. The thing that gets me always is like, and this is another problem that we like talk about all the time, but when you're a musician, you just like can't disconnect yourself from it. And so if you see it like a movie about music and they like do something and you're just like, no,
You
that's
always
not.
notice what was fake.
Yeah,
You're
you
like,
you always notice,
What are
and then
what are some
the rest of the movie, instead of like enjoying it, it just becomes about like, oh, there's another thing that they didn't do right.
what are some
That's not
examples
real.
of like
That's not how you
famous
say
films?
that.
well, usually it's like, so especially if like there's like a performance happening, like say there's like an orchestra performing in the movie. So like, obviously the audio is running over the film, but then you're looking and you're like, nope, their bows do not line up with the sound that is happening, or like they're like the conductor's totally like in a different time signature or a different tempo than whatever like we're hearing coming back to us, and like stupid ways that people are holding their instruments. You're like,
Oh,
oh my gosh,
it's
a professional
terrible.
would never hold their instrument
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah,
But
I
there's plenty of
imagine.
musicians in Hollywood. Surely they could have asked somebody, but
Or yeah, and the other thing is like whenever you get really good at like picking out like, oh well, they used a computer to make that sound,
Hmm.
for orchestras, where it's just like, this is beyond the pale. Like it's just comedic at this point how bad this sounds. And like, this is supposed to be like some famous orchestra or whatever. Not necessarily in Whiplash, but just like in like Mr. Holland's Opus, I think is like one of the biggest offenders of this, where he's just kind of like doing all sorts of stuff and they're just like playing computer sounds. I don't know.
No, that makes sense. Now that you know how the sausage is made, is you can it's never
exactly.
the same.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that way when we listen to music too. For me, at least, I'm always like 1, 2, 3, 4. Like you get into like the habit of like, where's the beat, where's the groove, and you stop enjoying some of the music sometimes because you're just like, oh, this thing and that thing, or like we talk about this all the time when we go to like this might get us in trouble, but when we go to like church or something, like any like church service for anything, we're like, listen to like the
Like people
church
are just
ladies
making
sing.
music
and
because they enjoy making music,
and I think that's wonderful that they like love making music, but then you're like constantly, your musician brain is like, that was out of tune, that's not in time, you're just like
It makes me feel like a jerk. I'm like, I just want
yeah.
to appreciate this performance. Like I wish you could like turn off that part of our brain for
Yeah,
a second.
and yet, that's what we're trying to get to also, is just like these people are just pure enjoyment of music, and I think we're a little bit ruined by music school because of that.
Yeah.
As is displayed in the movie, he just like goes so crazy that he like starts bleeding, and then finally he's like, supposed to be good enough to like keep going, and then he quits. It's like, that's what you do. You just like, you get so sick, you either like get so good at it that you don't have to get sick of it, or you get so sick that you are too good at it.
Yeah, I mean that was a very intense movie, but I don't think I've ever had any teacher of any capacity, even like remotely close to that. Luckily, um, another hot takes question is: what are the best and worst kind of parents to have or deal with?
This one I always feel a little guilty about answering because, like, obviously we are not parents, so like we have in our head what we think is ideal, and at the end of the day, we don't have kids, so obviously we can't say we know or would do any better. Really, I think the biggest thing is when you communicate with a parent that maybe their kid wasn't making the greatest choice. Some parents are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that happened. Let me talk to them so that we can resolve this. And some people are more the type of, I can't believe that would happen. My child doesn't do that. And to be honest, I think I maybe only had that happen like once. That doesn't happen a lot for me, but just people who, you know, realize that, kids are going to do things differently at school than they do at home because there's more opportunity to get away with things at school.
Yeah, I think this goes back to kind of the priorities thing that I was talking about before. Like obviously one dimension of this job is talking about like the kids and their priorities and your priorities. And I think generally you're able to line those up pretty well. I think with parents, it's a whole different ball game because I mean, they just have so much going on and they're, to us, their kid in music is like 95% of our lives. And for them, their kid in music is like,
a little sliver.
10% of their lives with all the commitments and whatnot. But like the actual like doing part of it is probably like 2% of their lives of like, why are you bothering me with this? And I think, generally teachers and parents are aligned in that they want the best for the student at the end of the day. They want the kid
everyone's on the same team.
Yeah, they want the kid to succeed. They want him to have fun. And I think that's where the line is like where they interpret your priority, your intention, and your, perceived success at doing this thing. Because at the end of the day, we are essentially like we're like, I don't even know. We're like a little robot that trains their child to like do something, and if the robot's doing okay, then like okay, then it doesn't really matter. But if like the robot's not doing okay, then we need to like fix the robot, basically. I don't know if I articulated that.
No, I will say on the lighter side, the worst type of parent, and I say this in completely understanding that like I'm terrible at reading emails. Like I play in Francisco's ensemble and I like don't read his emails all the time, and then I ask him information that was in his email. But it's the parent who like, I sent out like a reminder for something and then a couple minutes later, responds to the question that was definitely in the email. And I get it. I'm like that all the time, but it's just like, oh no, why?
No, that makes sense. Question that's not on our list here, but I was going to ask, what do you feel like would be resources for things that could help music education in general? I know obviously every state and every school is different, and there's only so much you could do to change like parents and teachers at large. But are there any like policy level things or just resource things that you think could make the process or your lives easier?
No, we actually talk about this a fair amount because Francisco, having grown up in Texas, like Texas band is so different from what band is like here in Colorado. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is like our state music education associations. So basically it's, like all of the music teachers in the state of Colorado pay dues to our organization. And in Texas, I believe it's the same.
Yeah.
But the roles that they play, I think, feel a little bit different because I know that, well, maybe I'll let you explain what they do in Texas, but I don't know. It just feels like music is so much more valued in Texas. And I think it might be because of a lot of the work that they've done. Not that the Music Education Association here in Colorado does not. I know that they care a lot. But education is also funded very differently between the two states. And, I think Colorado is like ranked in like the very low 40s in terms of per pupil funding. And so then when you throw fine arts into the mix, it's like there's even less support for fine arts than there is for general education anyway. So it's just kind of a struggle. Not so much in our school district. Our school district, we're very lucky. Does a really good job. We have a fine arts coordinator. In our building, there's a separate band, choir, and orchestra teacher. Our specific situation is great, but like rural districts in our state just don't get a lot of support just because of the way that per pupil funding works in Colorado.
Yeah, I don't know. I always think about this in terms of like, what do people know and what do they not know? And I think in this case, it's kind of like, like the allegory of the cave basically is for music. And it's in Texas. Texas is like the dude that like turned around and saw the shadow puppet guy, and he like went over there and like stole his beer and like left the cave and got really drunk, because it's just, I mean, they've in Texas, what has happened is like they've seen what this thing can be, and now they like want it all the time. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because obviously it yields some incredible results, and there are students who are really fulfilled by it, and teachers who are really good at what they do, and inspire lots of kids, and it affects so many people in a positive way. But at the same time, it's kind of a negative, because that's the expectation, right? Now it's not just like something that can be reached. Now it's something that has to be reached, like that has to happen all the time. And I think that's difficult in terms of, certainly for students to be expected to do that all the time, and to be sort of, I think in the worst cases, they're treated as like objects to reach a goal. Like it stops becoming about the education, and it becomes much more about the achievement of what they're doing.
It can be almost like abusive in some of those
Yeah,
situations.
definitely. But on the other side, there's some people that are doing great things that just really love doing that thing and teaching the kids that way, because it gets them so far, and they do it in a really positive and uplifting way. I think in Colorado, we're kind of still looking at the shadow puppet. We're still looking at the shadows. We're like, oh, look, there's a dragon this time. It's a little bit more, it feels a little bit more distracted, where there are portions of the constituency that like really know what this thing is, and they know how to get there. There's people that want to get there but don't know how, or maybe don't have the wherewithal to get there. And then I think there's people that are just not about it, which I think is, I think all three are fair. I don't think that you necessarily need to be about it all the time, as I'm saying. I don't think that everything needs to be as insane as possible, as high level as possible all the time. I do think, however, that you should be teaching to your best ability and to your highest expectation all the time, even if they don't reach it. I think that's the goal, is that they don't reach it.
That's the cool thing about music. Like it's never actually attainable. You're always growing or learning or aiming towards something. You're never really there.
I think they shouldn't be able to reach your expectation, not in a negative way, but in a way that like
your expectation is so
that it keeps them going. And I think some people just don't want to even go that far. They kind of want to get to the level of like, it's fun and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's a place for that. But I think what sort of needs to happen really to like make the broadest impact possible is, I think at a policy level, whatever you want to call it, educationally, I think music and every fine art needs to not be looked at as an activity. And I think that begins in elementary school, where it's, you go to your music class for like once a week, and that's your activity. Like that's to get you out of the classroom.
And unfortunately, a lot of like classroom teachers at the elementary level, I mean, those people are saints. They do so much, but they often see, like the PE music art teachers as that's their plan time, and not so much valuing maybe the skills that students are getting. And that's me generalizing. I know that they appreciate those things, but in the grand scheme of things, it really is just part of the schedule, and not always something that's valued because of the experience that kids get from it. And then, like in our in the school where I teach, the reason why our program is so successful is because students are required in sixth grade to try either band, choir, or orchestra. And I know that other school districts where their programs have had large success, it's because they had a fine arts requirement. You had, as a freshman, to take a fine arts course. Didn't necessarily have to be music. But I think exactly what Francisco is saying, when it is seen as something that should be part of curriculum and not just this extra activity like a club or something, then it starts to really take hold into communities a lot stronger.
Yeah, and that's part of the priority thing. Like once you understand, and like I think that's the barrier, is like once kids can understand what music is and can be, then the priority part isn't an issue because they know where they can go. I was thinking about this actually a couple days ago, um, in terms of like I think museums are a really interesting concept, but I think now they are not like, I don't think there are as many people that understand why they go to museums as there should be. Like if you take a random poll of like 100 people and you take them to see a painting by like Van Gogh or one of the other masters, and you ask them like, what do you like about this painting? I would wager that 87 of them would say like the colors are pretty, you know and maybe one person would talk about, oh, the brush stroke here, and this sort of context in the art style, and all those things, or like, I'm not saying that everybody should be kind of on the side of like, oh, I should be an art expert all the time through my education, but just kind of have a broader understanding of what they're there to see. Because I feel like largely museums, again, it's like I was just saying with music, like museums are now an activity. Like you go and you stand there and you pretend to like look at the painting and kind of get it, or the statue or whatever it is, and then you go on to the next one. And it's more of a thing to like, look at me, I went to a museum, look how cultured I am. But like, you're missing the part that makes you cultured from that. Like you went and saw it, but you're not getting what you need from it. And I think that's a really big reason of why, we keep seeing sort of this decline in classical music enjoyment, or like even sort of like promotion. Nowadays everything is STEM, and like everything in again, I think everything has its place. I think that has its place, but it's like, how much better would we be at science and math and all this stuff if we also had things to enjoy? Because if you solely focus on the STEM aspect, then you are creating yourself, or allowing yourself to be created into a one-dimensional being. Like
might as well just have AI.
Yeah. Like all you have is like the one thing that you're good at. Like you go to your box at work, you do your thing, and then you go home, and then what do you do? Like I think anybody can watch TV and enjoy it. I don't think you need like a sort of heightened sense of awareness for that. I don't even think you need that for art and music. I just think the context under which you experience art and music could be different if we had a different approach to it educationally. Like if you think about ancient Greece, these guys were doing STEM literally all the time. Like everything was, oh look, Pythagoras invented a theorem to like map a triangle or whatever. And but they were also at the same time like really active in things like theater and philosophy and music all the time. And I think that those two things combined were the things that like really allowed them to sort of think about things in a different way and set up these structures that we understand now. Because everything we have now is basically based on the Greeks or the Romans. Like we have this long tradition of Western history being influenced by these ancient civilizations that we really love to cherry pick, like, yes, here you must learn Pythagoras' theorem, but you will not learn about how Plato almost invented like the entire Western harmonic tonal system. Like, you'll learn about ratios for the purpose of math, but you won't learn about ratios for the purpose of learning music, which is how they came up with the major scale and tonality as we know it now.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I feel like I discovered this more with when I started learning keyboard, was like just how much math there was, like the spacing
Yes.
It's
between like
crazy.
keys from
And
major and minor and stuff.
yeah, and then when you get to post tonal theory, where it's like all about sort of like little niche math, which is super interesting, then that helps you, right? Like, that understanding helps you. But it's funny that it also doesn't work the other way.
Yeah, yeah, I
Post-tonal
definitely feel
feels
like
like being in
music.
math class. And even when you examine music from other cultures too, like I don't know, like it kind of going back to what you were talking about of where the role of music is, like in other cultures, like I think we kind of like dress up music as like,
Mhm.
oh, it's this thing that like brings everyone together, and all cultures have it, which like it is true, all cultures do have music in some form, but it actually serves very different purposes depending on what part of the world you're looking at. So we get stuck into these like boxes of, well, this is what music is for. Okay, great.
No, very, very true. I feel like I love listening to music though from around the world because it is so different. Like, you think of polyrhythmic beats.
Mhm.
There, I love Swiss folk metal, which is like a very interesting mix of instruments. Like it's like metal, but there's like a flute and a hurdy-gurdy, which you usually don't see. But
Gamelan
yeah.
music, that blows my mind. Like their music structure is like circular.
Mhm.
It's crazy to me.
Very cool. We'll end with one final question from Sheldon. I feel like we've had so many great discussions, but what is your favorite composer? And if that's hard to answer, some of your favorite.
I know. I'm always really bad at answering this question. It's like when someone asks
I
me what kind of music do you listen to, I'm like, I don't know. For me, kind of depends on the situation. I really appreciate the music of John Coltrane, jazz artist, and that's a very much a newer discovery for me. I haven't really ever been a jazzer in my life. That's a new thing. Um, Somebody that Francisco exposed me to, who is a wind composer, David Maslanka. Some of the most beautiful music that I've ever heard or gotten to play. And then, like when I think more classical, I love me some Strauss.
Yeah, I mean, for me, definitely sort of like on the more contemporary side, David Maslenka was one of, really formative composer for me. Um,
The cat got bored of the conversation.
Yeah.
Now he's playing with his sorry.
I decided to. I didn't actually decide to become a musician because of David's music, but it was a really big part of me wanting, like, me finding my love for music. I think now that I have a deeper understanding of how music works, I was talking about like the negative side of the musician brain, but now the positive side of the musician brain is that I feel like I can appreciate all music much more. Like, um, pop music and rap music, I appreciate and like at a much deeper level, and I find that I'm more open to things as I go on, because I'm just more interested in them, because I'm interested in how they work, like how they're constructed. And I think a lot of pop songs are very formulaic and very standard, but then you're listening and all of a sudden here's this pop song that's like doing this really new different thing, which is exciting. And if you're like a normal person that doesn't necessarily know all the intricacies of music, you know that it's different, but you don't know why. And if you're a musician, then you know why, and that's a lot more impactful to me. um Definitely my favorite go-to composer forever is going to be Bach. I just think the way, again, I'm talking about like the way his music is constructed, and the way that you can sort of like interpret it and consume it, I think is just so pure. Like it's the basis for obviously a lot of what our Western musical traditions are, is Bach and his conventions. But I like every time I listen to something, it's like the first time I've listened to it, and I'm always like finding new little intricacies and new little like lines to follow through. Um, in particular, like one of the most, well, there's two particular pieces of his that are really kind of like my cornerstones for loving Bach. The first one is his Chaconne, from his violin sonata. It's just some of the most beautifully written architectural music that you can hear. And it's just, I mean, the sounds that he made with the violin and like the feelings that it conjures in you, I think is just uh almost unreachable. Like just the level of like simplicity yet uh you know, it's simple yet complex, which I think is why it's so effective. And then the second Bach piece is his Goldberg variations, which there's two, maybe there's more than two, but there's two recordings of it that are really kind of outstanding. And the first, they're both by Glenn Gould, who was a really virtuosic and prolific pianist back in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And he has two recordings of it that are really famous. One where he's 16 and he plays it for the first time, or he records it for the first time, and then one where it's, you know, a few months before he died, and it's kind of at the end of his piano career, and they're totally different interpretations of this thing. You know, you listen to the first one and it's very exact and it's very clean and intentional, and it like reveals to you a lot about like how Bach wrote his music and how it sounds. Then the other set of recordings is much more informed. You know, it's like even just the first uh book of it is like, you know, the first one he takes it at the tempo that it's written, and it's kind of quick and it's like clinky because that's how it's supposed to be. And then in the later recording, it's like really slow and pensive, and you know, it just kind of is a really good bookend for what I think like a musician's progression is like. You know, at first you're really focused on get it right, get it clean, and then as you experience more things, you kind of let your life experience flow into what you're doing. So that's what I would say.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, at least in terms of classical, my favorite is Vivaldi because I tend to like faster music. So, you know,
Yeah.
Four Seasons is just like a classic for me,
Have you
personally.
heard the Max Richter version of that?
Oh no, but now I want to go check
Vivaldi. Okay, so yeah, go look at I think it's called Vivaldi Recomposed or something, or the New Four Seasons or something like that. Max Richter, who's I think he's Austrian, but he like remixed it basically. He did a remix of the Four Seasons, and he like wrote different conventions into it and added electronics, and it's just beautiful music.
Okay, I'm gonna go probably check that out right after this. So that's exciting to hear. But I feel like you guys like dropped a lot of great knowledge. So thank you both for coming on. Is there
Yeah.
anything else about music education you all want to say before we sign off here?
I mean, I don't know. You know, to your listeners, I hope that if they're not necessarily classical music fans, I hope that they take it upon themselves to like at least try going to, you know, a symphony concert, whether it's just like their pops concert where they're playing, you know, whatever trendy music, or a really popular thing these days is like music with the movies. Like they'll play a movie and they'll play the soundtrack live, which is really cool. But you know, I'd also push people to like kind of get out of their comfort zone and go check it out, because there's, like we were saying, like I feel like we dress it up a lot, and like there's this barrier to it. But again, it's only after like all you need to do is like understand it at a certain level. Like you just need to get past that inhibition point of like, oh, well, it's classical music and it just goes on for really long and it's boring. Like, why do you like a movie more than a orchestra concert if they last the same amount of time? Is because the movie is like flashy, but you still like the soundtrack in the movie. This is just like a different version of that. So I'd encourage people to go out and try and catch a symphony concert every now and then, and make it part of like your consumption, and just try and understand it a little bit more. And then selfishly, I think we would be much better off if more people would try to play instruments that they don't know, or like endeavor in music in some way, because again, it just gives you a kind of a more holistic understanding of life
It's
and,
never
and
too late to
yourself.
try.
Yeah, seriously.
I've often thought that I really want to start a beginning band for adults, like people who never got the chance to learn an instrument, or maybe gave up like 30 years ago. I think that'd be really fun. My final parting thought is mayonnaise is an instrument.
The
The answer, finally.
Yeah, anything is an instrument if you try hard enough.
eternal question has been resolved on this podcast.
Yes.
But yeah, thank you guys so much. I think those are great words to end off on, and I feel like I learned a lot. So it was very educational, at least for me. But yeah, thank you so much again, and best endeavors with all things musical and teaching.
Yeah, thanks so much.